stars and everything in between. He's the star Richard Bazzi from Schultz Ford. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star. And our guest today, I'm so interested in everything you're about to talk about. Kathryn Childers, welcome to the Cars, Stars, and everything in between. And what did you used to do? You're a former what?
Well, I would say I'm not a car, I'm not a star, and I'm probably everything in between. So that would probably fit that segment very well. Used to be a lot of things, but my first used to be was I was one of the first 5 women selected to serve in the United States Secret Service back in 1970, 71.
Kathryn,
So I guess that makes me in between.
it doesn't. It's fascinating. Your story's fascinating.
Thank you.
What possessed you? Did you grow up wanting that? What possessed you? Was it the position? Was it because you were a female, you wanted to achieve things that nobody had ever done before? What drove you?
Well, I would love to say something drove me, but it didn't exist when I was young or when I was looking for a future or graduating from college. They didn't hire women in the Secret Service or the FBI. I'm sure there were some in the CIA and during World War II. But as a rule, there was no availability for any jobs for women in law enforcement, or particularly in Washington. A kind of look back was when I was a kid, I wanted to be Annie Oakley because I was athletic and I liked to ride a horse, and I grew up out west where there weren't very many role models to grow up to be. You certainly wouldn't be a news anchor or a talk show host or anything really but a teacher or a secretary or perhaps a nurse. And I just wanted to do something different when I graduated college.
Kathryn, I was going to say, one of my dear friends spent 20 plus years in the Secret Service, and a lot of those years on presidential duty. I don't think the average person understands the scope of what the Secret Service does in general. So could you give us a quick overview of what the Secret Service does, if there's a quick way to do it?
I'll try to. They do so many things nowadays. It was easier for me to understand back then. When they recruited the 5 of us, they were looking to expand protection, Bubba. It was not too far down the road from when President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. And some of the senior agents, for instance, Clint Hill, the agent you've seen time and time again on the back of the limousine, attempting to save the president, but did save Mrs. Kennedy. He particularly took on the gauntlet of saying, we need women. We need a extended portion of protection that would include places women could go with protectees or could be undercover with protectees. People rarely knew who we were, and that was a big advantage. But when I sat with him, he actually hired me from my job as being a staffer on the Hill. I was a military caseworker, and heard over a lunch conversation from a cohort that, can you believe this? They're hiring female bodyguards for Tricia Nixon, the president's daughter. And I said, really? And she said, yes, but she said, I'd be scared to do that. I mean, you have to be able to be brave. You'd have to die for the president if you needed to. They only pay $7,500 a year. And Jiminy, you have to learn to know how to shoot a gun. And I said, I could do that. Where do I sign up?
Wow.
The funny part was I had grown up in the West, in Utah and Colorado, and my father was one of those great dads that when you said, would you teach me how to do something, he'd teach me almost anything. I was a horseback rider. I skied, I played tennis, and as a little girl, he taught me how to shoot an old .22 because I did tell him I wanted to be Annie Oakley and I couldn't shoot. So he said, well, then you better come down and see if you can shoot this can off the pole and see what we can do about that. And I did it quite handily. And when I hit that can like that, I was hooked. I loved doing something that most little girls didn't get to do and had no idea that would change the course of my life.
So how old were you when you began?
Oh, I was about 8 when I shot the can off the fence post.
And then when you went to apply at the Secret Service, you were how old?
Oh, I was 22, I think, 23. It was after college. I graduated from the University of Colorado in 1969. And as you may remember, it was pretty turbulent at those times. Lots of protests against Vietnam, unhappiness with political parties. There was what they called the silent majority when Richard Nixon was rerunning, lots of anger. And of course, we'd suffered 3 assassinations in my period of time from graduating from college to graduating from the university. When you think that President Kennedy was assassinated, then Robert Kennedy, and then Martin Luther King.
Yep.
These are scary, turbulent times. So I just thought maybe if I could find something, I would like to be back and part of the change, because, you know, some people have called it the women's movement, but if you really look back, it was the women's revolution, because so many things did change with the help of the government and with the help of many men. But it was a major change for women in the direction they would end up going.
And politics really couldn't enter into it for you.
No.
It has to be apolitical almost, because your job is your job no matter who's in office.
Oh, absolutely. It was absolutely apolitical. You could not choose a particular party. I suppose you could, you know, in your heart of hearts, but the reality was you pledged and were sworn in to protect anyone or anything or any place that was presided or presented to you by the director and your supervisors and really the president. You worked for the security of the country. Go ahead.
Do you actually have to pledge that you would die for your country or die for the president?
He asked me that in my interview, and I said that really wouldn't be a problem, because frankly, I have a patriotic heart. I always have. And had I been a man, I probably would have been part of the draft. I would have served my country, and I would have served it, you know, dutifully. But there were no places for women to serve their country at that point. You couldn't get into a military academy, for instance. They didn't take women. There was some service, I believe, in the nursing corps, but he said, you need to be aware that your job is to save and protect at all cost. The agents are sworn to protect and serve. And that can be the president, his family, that can be a vice president, that can be a political. Later on, they established, after Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, as I recall, they elevated protection, which was a huge job to all the candidates. So agents were flying crisscross across the country, and they were dropping women, one of the 5 of us, into those protective details and others. So now we'll go back to what your question was. I talked too much.
No, it's fabulous. It's so, I don't want to say enchanting, but it kind of is. Did you ever really take a pause and think, wow, look where I am right now. Look what I'm a part of. I mean, did you ever realize what you were actually a part of?
You know, I did realize that something was important. I think the one thing that was unique about women at that time is there was a somewhat, except for the so-called high heels on the ground and the women like Gloria Steinem and the women who had really stepped out in the women's movement, most of us were kind of, shall we say, we drank the Kool-Aid that what we would do would be to grow up, find a husband, have a family, stay at home, which was certainly an honorable role. But I don't think we were as angry as some women that said, hey, we can't make the same amount of money. Hey, they don't let women take these kinds of interesting jobs because they're women. And so at the time, however, when it happened, it was like, my goodness. I mean, I was really pretty amazed. I thought, why did they take me? You know, they I'm sure interviewed women from all over the place. And I was amazed because I didn't have all the credentials that I thought I should have had, because there was no degree in law enforcement for women at that time.
If you're just tuning in, this is Kathryn Childers. When we come back, we're going to talk about your book. It's called Scared Fearless. More when we return with cars, stars, and everything in between. Perfect. Stand by.
Was that 9 minutes?
That was 9 minutes. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, it was. It goes fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
It goes fast. Give me a second here. I'll save this here. Yeah, you're amazing.
Well, thank you. What a nice thing to say this early in the morning.
He's not usually nice.
Oh, I'm always nice, Richard.
I'm impressed you do this, Richard. I'm sure it's a real public service for Pittsburgh in your area. Well,
thank you. But and I'll bring that back to you also, because you left what you did and took on a completely different career.
Yes, I did.
All right. And here in 1 second. This is just saving. This is awesome. Here and here we go. 100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDK. This is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. He's the star Richard Bazzi from Schultz Ford, schultzford.com. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star. And our guest today is a former U.S. Secret Service agent, Kathryn Childers. Welcome back. Your story is just really unbelievable and amazing.
Well, thank you. You're nice to say. It
So many,
me as well, I think.
and there's so many touch points with you. When I read parts in the excerpts of your book, and I didn't read it cover to cover, but I did read pieces and chapters and things that I thought really jumped out at me, and watched some videos. It's fascinating to me, especially when you alluded to the fact that when you were hired, it was a $7,500 a year job. But then I hear something else that makes me want to ask this. What was the comparable pay for a male hired at that same time?
Well, much higher, because we were hired with the offer that we would become special agents, but they brought us in as actually members of the White House police force, as really, I would call it on-the-job training at a much lower rate than the men who were more highly qualified. I mean, we were not more highly qualified than we were. We had passed all the physical training, we'd had college degrees, we'd passed the in-house education, and yet we were a tier lower until we passed the they can do this approach. And you asked me earlier, was I aware of the history? I think I was aware of the fact, because people in my book called Scared Fearless, I've always gone back to the idea that my father told me that if you want to do anything that you would want to write a book about, you do something that scares you. And it scared me at first, because I couldn't imagine that I could, step to that line and be good enough to be one of those people. But as it turned out, the fear probably helped me in thinking, okay, I can do this. And I just kept getting more and more opportunities to try different things within the service. And in the end, I felt my biggest challenge at that point was to do it, and do it well, and not screw it up, so to speak, for the rest of the women in the world who would really be interested in that service. And we didn't, and we passed muster. So now there are over 500 women agents. So
wow,
that was
actually going to ask you that.
Yeah.
So now over 500. So you've been such an integral part of that, from 5 to 500. And so here's your book, Scared Fearless.
Thank you.
And honestly, one of your sayings that comes from this is something that I say in another version, but it's do it scared.
Mm-hmm. That was my plan for the title, but the publisher changed it. So.
Oh, well, I like them both, but I do like do it scared, because I think that that's the greatest lesson for a son, for a daughter, for a business associate, for anybody.
Yes.
And the other thing is to be part of something that you can't be afraid to make a decision. You can't be afraid to, otherwise you're rendered helpless. But do it scared, to me, I mean, I'm thinking of a T-shirt that says "Do it scared." I love it.
Well, I have lots of stickers. I'll send you.
Yes, send me some. And honestly, because then you transitioned and you left the Secret Service, right?
Yeah.
And you went into a broadcast career.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things. So when you came on, not to interrupt you, but I forgot this, and I don't want to forget it again.
Sure.
When you came on, I was supposed to ask you if I was speaking to Kathryn or Sassy.
Oh, Sassy? Yeah. Well, both. I'm a little bit of both. Sassy, as Richard mentions, is my clown character. I volunteer at the Children's Hospital here in South Texas.
Oh, that's awesome.
There are 40 of us that dress up in these elaborate costumes that kind of represent our prior thought about ourselves. So, of course, I was Sassy the sheriff, complete with boots and, chaps and all those things. I did want to tell you one thing, Bob, because you'd asked about the breadth of the exposure.
Yep.
We not only protected people and places, I protected foreign dignitaries, I protected the Queen of Spain and Golda Meir. Then they would pull me for something else, which included the Kennedy Children's Detail, which protecting John and Caroline Kennedy, and spending 2 months in the island, or 2 summers on the island of Scorpios, traveling with particularly Caroline and her mother, Jacqueline Kennedy, Onassis. And the thing was, it's like media. It never was the same. One morning I'd fly to Greece. The next morning I'd come back and work an undercover buy, which was the other component, was that we were buying as undercover agents bad money, counterfeit money, from bad guys. And that's how you stopped counterfeit, because you would arrest them and because they were making this counterfeit money. So
as somebody in the Secret Service, were you able to develop any kind of personal relationships with the people that you were protecting?
I would not say it was personal. I would say it was private, in the sense that my most important thing, particularly with a young woman like Caroline, who didn't want protection, who would at 16, was that she trusted me. Trust is really an issue. Having a sense of humor is really an issue. And being good at what you do was an issue. Those three things, when they told us I should keep her happy, keep her entertained if I had to, keep her safe, and keep her alive, and also keep her from embarrassing the President of the United States or her mother, that was a big recipe.
Wow.
But she had to trust me. She had to like me a bit. But in terms of, do we correspond? No. Have I seen her since many years ago? No. I follow her. I'm very proud of Caroline and what she's done.
That's awesome.
But in meeting her mother, she was such an influence, because she was an icon and still is. And once I met her after I came off the children's detail, and she said, "Oh, Miss Clark, you lived such an interesting life." And I said, "Oh my, Mrs. Onassis, it's so only relative."
Oh, wow.
But then I did leave, and I left because at those times, and I speak a lot to large groups, conventions, and college women and men, and particularly men of daughters, because they're the ones who seem to enjoy my material, in that where we were going with all of this was opportunity. And why they hired me was that I had all these crazy skills. For a woman in 1969, I had been on a rifle team in high school because Dad told me how to shoot cans off a post. I was one of the best shots in the country. I played tennis competitively. I skied competitively. I had a horse and was quite good with horsemanship. So when they were looking for someone to drop into the protection of Caroline, for instance, I had all these unusual skills, plus I could shoot, and plus I was athletic. Because so oftentimes the Secret Service is to embed themselves in protectees' lives without being intrusive, without being appropriate, but being ready and willing to save their lives if they needed to. And that you had to be close in that environment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It really does. It's amazing. I would suggest to anybody that we clearly in 18 minutes can't touch on everything that would be interesting to everybody, because inside that book is a wealth of information about you and about the contributions you've made to women, to the country, and to everybody around you. And I really am grateful that you took the time for us today.
Sure. To answer your question, I did go on to a television career, and that scares most people to death. As you know, being on radio or television is scary because you're kind of out there. And I did that for 18 years after I married my husband and moved on to Texas. So,
and you do have a son, I believe?
I have a son. Clark is in the business, and he's a screenwriter and putting his toes in directing at this point in his life. And he lives in LA, and terrific guy. And I had inherited 3 stepsons. So I've been a mother as well. There isn't much I haven't done.
Wow. By the way, the book, once again, is called Scared Fearless. Kathryn, where can people buy this book? Because I agree with Richard. Everybody should buy and read this book. Where can they buy it?
Amazon. It's right there on Amazon.com. I think you can find it under Kathryn Childers or Scared Fearless. And I seem to have gotten a lot of press on YouTube on other things I've done. I'm getting ready, actually, to go back to the Secret Service in Washington and talk to 50 some odd new female agents or female women that are in the job to show them how hard it was in the old days when they really didn't know what to do with us, and we carried our .357 Magnums in our purses. So it was rather archaic, but we did it.
Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us for Cars, Stars, and everything in between.
Kathryn, thank you.
So nice to meet you. Say hello to Pittsburgh for me in the group.